Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Lepore. I'm from ASCY, and tonight we're continuing our conversation about surviving and thriving during COVID-19. So we began our series. It's a 4-part series. We began it with the video that you, I hope, have seen, but we're going to get Dr. Jean to talk about that just in a minute. So there's just a couple housekeeping things I want to let you know. The majority of you have no video, so that's the way it should be, really. We should just only see your face, but that's your name rather, but that's okay. Everyone is muted for the moment. So what I want to let you know is there's 2 questions. You can ask questions. One at the bottom you'll see in an orange box is the chat box. And so that's pretty straightforward. If you just hover over that, you can simply just type in a question. And I have the other ASCY managers helping me behind the scenes. So I have Lois, Liz, and Paula, who are going to monitor that chat box. And so we'll bring questions forward. There could be times where your questions are going to be similar to other people's questions. So there could be a chance we're going to combine questions. So no worry there. The other way you can ask a question is through on the Manage Participants box at the bottom there. If you go to that, you'll see a way that you can raise your hand, and that is a way that you yourself can ask the question. So if you raise your hand, the managers working behind the scenes will see that prompt, and then they'll call upon you to talk, and they'll unmute you, and you can then ask the question directly. So you've got the 2 ways. We can ask it for you, or you can ask it yourself. So it's my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Jean Clinton, our community champion. Dr. Clinton, as you know, is a clinical professor at McMaster University in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences. She's our community champion on children's well-being and social emotional development and learning. So welcome, Jean. Welcome back to our conversation.
Great. Hi, and thanks. It's great to be here, and welcome everybody on this lovely wet evening. I'm so thrilled to be part of this ASCY activity. It's been fun so far, and hopefully we'll have a fun night of questions.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure how many people here that have joined us tonight, if they've looked at the video on your YouTube channel just yet. So if you could give us just a quick overview of some of the topics that you have discussed for that.
Sure, great, Sue. So I've got my notes here because I've had 1 or 2 conversations over this period of time. So I'll just refer to that. So what we've done, for those of you who are listening in, is we've set up 4 different conversations. And our first one, we were talking about connection is key, and how can we support our families and children during this time of COVID-19. And so what Sue and I talked about and really emphasized was the fact that we have to look after our own well-being first, that we need to be learning about our own stressors and how to lend our calm to our children. So to figure out where is our happy place, and it's, you know, like that thing about put your own mask on first that they talk about on airplanes. And so we also talked a bit, and we'll talk more tonight, about how does the brain operate under stress. So we're stressed as parents and grandparents, and our kids are stressed, and so we talked a bit about how the brain operates under stress. We talked about as well the huge importance of helping our kids as well as ourselves label our emotions more effectively, because when you label it, you know, when you name it, you can tame it, and then you can claim it. So that recognizing your own stress. And we got us talking about the fact that we can be physically distant, but it's super important that we manage our stress by being emotionally connected to other people, you know, doing things like this tonight and connecting with our like-minded people is really so important. And we talked about how do you create a cozy harbor for our kids? And you know, you'll hear as you listen to it, and those of you who have listened to it, that there's a parallel process going on here. The cozy harbor we create for kids is also, we're talking about how do we create that for ourselves. So we also talked about my dear friend Stephen de Groot's model of the 3 great states, that when we can create safety for our kids and for ourselves, a feeling of safety emotionally, physically, that that we're able to kind of operate at optimal. And also, he talks about being safe. He talks about feeling significant. And that is that you feel that you have a sense of belonging. You feel that you have value to people and that you really feel valuable. And so as we think about this with our kids, and we think about this in our programs and working with parents just now, it's really, how can we communicate that we value them, that they're valuable, that there is a sense of belonging and a strong sense of connection. And we also talked about feeling significant, that you've got a purpose and a reason for being. So we looked into what are the things that we can do to create in this stressful time some more peace. So, and using the neuroscience and my friend Dr. Bruce Perry's work, we talked about creating predictability in the environment, creating routines that are really, really important. You know, the morning check kids would have in their childcare, make that the morning breakfast check-in. Have times when there's play, lots and lots of play, have time when there's reading. Don't be too rigid in your structures, but make sure that there are routines and predictability. Again, with the key message so that kids feel that they're really belonging, that you are on top of things, that you're managing things, even if you're feeling absolutely freaking exhausted, you can create that sense of connection. So that concept of maintaining calm with the kids, you'll see from when you look at the video, there's some really great resources that we talked about. There's a Psychology Today workshop paper that you can access, and it's called The Pandemic Toolkits That Parents Need. And it talked about 8 things based on science and neuroscience that can help these times be more, be able to deal with them more. And they included things like creating the routine and the predictability, to make sure that people are getting adequate sleep, that you're exercising, that you're finding your calm so you can lend it, that you've got family meals that you can do together, that you're reaching out to people and not staying isolated, mobilizing to help others. A big one that they talk about is monitor your media use. Stop following the news, and particularly for the kids, to turn it off, because they don't know that every so often there's a repeat, you know, that's on a repeat loop. And they don't realize that that's the same thing that we just heard about half an hour ago. And the other thing is really to help others, to think about the future, to reach out and see those who need support, but also to be thinking about this too shall pass. And then we had a great conversation that I hope that we talked a bit more about the links between what I was talking from neuroscience and what we're learning about tools for life and how they're being utilized in the community, with emotional check-in, helping kids develop a knowledge of their emotions, creating cozy corners. So if I do say so myself, Sue and I had a great time, and it's worth checking out.
Wow.
So did that capture things, Sue?
That was fantastic. Thank you. That was a wonderful overview, play-by-play of all the wonderful things that you talked about. Thank you. So I'm going to begin with a question that we have from the floor, and it talks about the effects of stress on our brains and the thinking patterns that children have, and they're developing them. And there is a comment that this has been going on for some time now. And so if you could please talk about the effects of stress on the developing brain in a particularly stressful, challenging time like we're living through right now.
Right. So thanks, Sue. So I think the first thing I want to say is that we've got lots of things that stress us, and stress gets a bad rap. So, you know, when we're hungry, that's our system turning on a stress. When we're tired, that's our body turning on a stress. So stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. So that's number one. You know, preparing for this, figuring out that, you know, this is the first time we've done something like this. That's stressful, but it's exciting. So stress, let's not make the stress the devil. Our kids, particularly our little kids, they don't have a sense of time in the same way that we do. They don't have a sense of how long this is taking, but we do. And so it's the same message as I mentioned before, that we need to, if we are not stressed by the goings, you know, the happenings now, then our kids are going to be protected. Because what we can say is, rather than we're not doing what we used to do, we can say we are doing this new way of being together. So there, I think, two really important things. When we're talking about stress in the brain, what we worry about is when the stress is not predictable, when it's not moderated and buffered by relationship. That's when we worry about stress. And why do we worry? Because our brains are developed from a very simplistic brain of watching our heart rate and our blood pressure and those things. And it's like a triangle that goes from that basic brain to our emotional brain, to our thinking brain, up to the cortex, our limbic system in the middle. What our friend Stuart Shanker talks about, the basic brain and the reactive brain is the brown brain, and then the limbic system he talks about as the red brain, and the top brain is the blue brain, our smart brain, our thinking brain. What we worry about is when there is too much stress, that limbic brain, the emotional brain, the fight or flight brain gets overly active, and new learning can't happen. So when that, all of our energy, all of our glucose, or, you know, the sugar that feeds the brain, when that limbic system is on overdrive, then there isn't the same flow that's going to the thinking brain. And what you see in that situation is behavior challenges. And what Stuart teaches us is that those behavior challenges are not misbehaviors, they're stress behaviors. So when the brain is under stress, not buffered by relationships, you see much more misbehavior, but we reframe it as stress behavior. And we can talk a bit more about that if that's of interest to people.
I have to unmute myself. Yes, absolutely. You made some really good points about our stress can be contagious. And I think Stuart Shanker would talk about that, about stress contagion, and that we do have this resonance when we're sensing someone else is upset. We too can feed off that as well. And so when we present as parents or caregivers of being confident and calm and resilient, I think that those qualities tend to be shared with the children in our care. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, Sue. And I'm glad that you brought up this concept of the kind of limbic systems of people talking to each other, and it is, in some terms, is called stress contagion. And we're getting more and more evidence of this. My friend Kim Schonert-Reichel, who's a fabulous researcher out in UBC, has looked at stress contagion, has looked at teachers who describe being burnt out, and they measure their cortisol and the cortisol of the kids in their classrooms, and that they find that the kids who have teachers who are burned out, their cortisol levels are higher. What does cortisol have to do with anything? When our stress system gets turned on, our amygdala, deep in our brain, releases signals. Our brain is always scanning the environment for threat, sends signals down to release adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline so we can fight and flee, and cortisol, which heals. And so the cortisol is released when we're stressed, and there needs to be something that says, okay, turn it off, we've got enough of this, and that's the hippocampus. The problem is, if the stressor continues, the cortisol stays bombarding, and that is bad for the brain. Cortisol, unrelenting, unremitting cortisol is bad for new learning and memory. It's bad for biology, or proteins like C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory thing. That's why people are talking about the impact on the body. But what Kim has shown is that burnt out teachers, kids higher cortisol, not good for learning. What they haven't figured out is that the teacher is stressing the kids, or the kids stressing the teacher. They don't have all of the answers yet about that. So stress contagion is super important. Lend our calm. It really communicates out.
Excellent, Jean. All right, I have one more question, and then I think others have questions too. But when children are asking us about the pandemic and when will this end, how do we communicate that to them in a way that doesn't elevate their anxiety even more?
Right, that's a great question.
It is.
So I think the very first thing, when we're talking to kids about the pandemic, we have to keep in mind what our mindset is. You know, what we're thinking about the pandemic may not be what the kids are thinking about the pandemic. So the number one rule is listen first. So when they ask you a question about when is the pandemic going to be over, say, oh, you know, that's a great question. What are you thinking about? And then what you hear is, well, I'm wondering when we're going to be able to go to Fortino's all together and I can watch the fish. So we first of all have to not assume that we know what it is that they're thinking. So number one is listen. Then the second thing is to reassure them that, one, we don't know. And it's hard when you don't know, but there are lots of very smart, caring people who are thinking about when is the best time for us to get back to what we used to do. So you're reassuring them. And then when they say what it is that they're afraid of, you don't say, oh, you don't need to be afraid of that. You know, we're going to be going back to school. But what you say is you validate their feelings. You say, wow, that's a very big feeling and a big worry that you have. What do you think will help with that big feeling? What has helped you before when you've felt that way, or when you've had other feelings like that? So that's, you know, that's the tools for life kind of stuff that you were teaching me about the other day. But I think it's important that we check in with what's our adult worry first of all, before we assume that that's what our kids are thinking. You know, I'll give you an example of this. My sister-in-law, who was a wonderful educator, she's now retired, said that there was a little kid who went to his teacher and said, how much longer is school? And so what you think affects how you feel, affects how you act. So she thought, he can't wait to get out of here. How she felt was annoyed, and how she acted was not very terrific. But then my sister-in-law asked him, well, why do you ask? And he said, because I love it so much. I never want it to end. Right? Let's not assume.
Beautiful. That's really well said. Yes, you did make a mention of tools for life, and absolutely there are concepts in the tools for life for those of you that have done the training or have practiced it in your center about validating emotions, about talking about emotions all the time, about reassuring children that all emotions are okay, and that what we need to do is to develop some tools to cope or handle our emotions, because some emotions are bigger than others. And so while it's okay to feel angry or impatient, it isn't okay to hit your friend. So how can we then cope with the feelings that you have in a way that allows you to still own those feelings and to still be able to get along with your friends?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love it. I love it. Thanks, Sue.
Excellent. Okay. So Liz, I see, has a question. So I'm going to let Liz unmute her microphone and go ahead, Liz.
Hi, everybody. I have a question from the chat box. Well, it's actually a comment about parents finding it really difficult, Jean, at home with behavior, and really using the television as the place to go. So that continuous, not necessarily watching the news, but the comment is that the go-to is to go to continuous children's programming. Can you speak to that a little bit, Jean?
Yeah, okay. So on the one hand, on the other hand, but my big on the one hand is thank God for good children's program and television during these challenging times. Oh my gosh. You know, we are now expecting parents to be teachers. You know, they're supposed to be doing this homeschooling, and it shouldn't be homeschooling. It's supporting learning at home. They're supposed to be great spouses. They're supposed to be great, running the world at home and also doing their work. So come on, give me a frickin' break. So I don't think it's a bad thing that kids get to watch a bit more television than they were before. But I think we have to ask ourselves some crucial questions. And that is, what are the conditions that are leading me, you know, the reflection that are leading me to want to have the television in the first place? And so reflect and say, how can I set the day up better so that they're not plunked in front of the TV all day, that we figure out, we balance out or take turns so that the kids are getting outside and playing, that we're doing some creative, playful craft stuff, and that we're not just relying on this. So I am not nearly as worried about it in these times as a coping strategy. I worry a little bit about families who are using it all of the time, because those kids are going to have a bigger transition going back to the childcare world and the school world. But you know, give yourself a break. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a lovely tool called the Family Media Use Plan. And what the key is that there's balance. So get balance in what you do, but don't beat yourselves up that the kids have sat for 2 hours watching something while you got your menu and your cooking and did a couple of Zoom calls. It's not going to break their brain. If it's the only thing they're getting, big worry. But life is really real. I don't know if people would agree with that. Let me know.
Absolutely. I think they would agree with you. Another question that's burbled up is about not only the children, but adults too seem to be having a really hard time sleeping, really finding that restful place. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely real. People are reporting this internationally. And so what that comes from, I think, is a couple of things. I think one is the dysregulating of routine, so that people are not doing their body system and their body rhythm is out of sync. So what's important is back to those principles that I talked about in the pandemic toolkit. And that is, as much as possible, don't be up late because you've got, you know, you have to stuff things in, but go to bed at a routine time. Get up at a routine time. Make sure that you're not suffering from decision fatigue. If there are things that you can make simple, I'm wearing these clothes all the time, I'm eating this breakfast all the time, you know, so if watch out for decision fatigue. So that's one thing. The second thing is very big, and that is monitor how much time you're on your phone. Monitor how much time you're on your screen. What we know is that the stimulation that you get from those screens, particularly in the 2 hours before bedtime, affects your melatonin, affects your sleep. So we need to return to good sleep hygiene. They're very, very important things to look at. So there are strategies that you can use. So to have a bedtime routine, don't have your 2 hours beforehand on screens. And if you do wake up, try the meditation or the mindfulness, so that you focus on your breathing and you pay attention. You breathe in for 4, you hold it for 4, and you exhale for 4. Even just letting out big sighs changes what Stephen Porges talks about in terms of the polyvagal theory. It moves you to thinking, to having more activation in your in your cortex. So they're all strategies to think about. One, it's very real. We're reading reports all over the place about this.
Great. When we were taping our first conversation, you talked about the cozy harbor. And I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more about creating that cozy harbor for us.
Yeah. So the cozy harbor is the picture that comes to mind when I think about attachment theory, essentially. That what John Bowlby talked about was creating a secure base. So that is, the circle of security talks about having a predictable care home giver, that when the child is upset or distressed or hurt in any way, they've got that to zoom back into, not, different kind of zoom, but, in they come, and they've got that predictable, I care about you, I'm going to look after you no matter what. Because when you've got that safe, cozy harbor, then in development, then you're free to then go out and explore the world. So to me, that's the picture of the cozy harbor. It really has to do with attachment security, creating that no matter what happens, the world is a safe place for me. We validate that when kids are sick or upset, that they come to their caregiver. Yeah, so that's the cozy harbor that I mean metaphorically, as well as physically. You can create that by creating comfy spots in the house. My daughter has, with her twins and her 4-month-old now, in the living room, it's a complete playhouse. But underneath, she's covered up her dining room table with a big cloth. And the kids have got their little cozy harbor that they can go into when they want quiet time, which quite often with 3 boys is needed.
Absolutely. It reminds me there's some connections there to Tools for Life and creating that cozy corner or the cozy cove or whatever people want to call it. But it's that place in the classroom that is soft, a little bit dark, extremely cozy, a place where children are welcome to go whenever they're feeling a little anxious, a little tired, a little sad, just restless. They're not really sure what it is that they want to get started with, and that's a perfect place to go, like you say, to get their calm back, to have that reset and that and then be ready to join when they're ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now I can see that Lois Saunders has her hand raised, so she has a question from the floor as well. So Lois, go ahead.
Hi, Sue and Dr. Jean. When I first came onto the meeting, I heard Dr. Clinton say something about the impact of stress on the body. And I wonder if she could tell us more about that. It perked my interest. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, great, my friend. So what we're learning about the impact of stress, and that's high levels of stress on the body. So keep in mind, stress is good for us, just like anxiety is good for us because it gets us at peak performance. But when there's too much stress, what we know is that cortisol, that system, it turns on different aspects of our immune system. So you get more things called cytokines, you get more inflammatory markers, and so it can affect your heart, fibromyalgia. There are many things that are associated with early or childhood high stress and later disease. There's a study that's very interesting called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And what they did in San Diego, California, is they looked at 17,000 adults, and they had their medical history, followed them for a while, but they also asked them 10 questions. Before the age of 18, did you experience high stress, or did you experience maltreatment, physical or sexual abuse, family dysfunction, like somebody was incarcerated, or there was physical violence at home, divorce or separation. And what they then did was they made the connection between asking those 10 questions and what later health was like. So people who had high number of adverse childhood experiences, they looked at their later health and went, holy cow, if you have had more than 4 adverse childhood experiences, then your likelihood of having heart disease is really high. Your likelihood of having emotional problems is really high. Your likelihood of having academic and life employment are very much varied. And what they think is the mechanism is twofold. One, that biological experience of high cortisol and high stress systems set your stress reactivity to a point where you do not, you've got more inflammatory processes going on. You don't fight disease as well, but also you end up in situations where life is more challenging for you. So you're more likely to experience poverty and all of the attendant stress that causes. So there's a big body of research now on the adverse childhood experiences that people are talking about. There's a great book about it and great TED Talks by Nadine Burke Harris, B-U-R-K-E Harris. The book's called The Deepest Well, and if you Google her, she does a fabulous TED Talk.
That's great. Thank you for that, Gina. I've made a note of that. When you talk about adverse childhood experiences, it really resonates with me, and about tools for life too, but just life in general. And I know that you say this, and it is so true, that you can have these adverse childhood experiences, but when you have that one special person in your life, like an aunt, a grandparent, of course a parent, a coach, a teacher, an early childhood educator, when you have that one special person in your life who believes in you and has faith in you, then anything is possible.
Absolutely. That's such an important part. So that's the other side of the adverse childhood experiences, is they looked at, so I've talked about this, you know this, Sue, for years. The power of one to make a difference is absolutely huge. But what's not as much publicized about the adverse childhood experience survey that Feliti and Anda did is the fact that those families, or those people who reported that they had positive experiences at home, even in the presence of some of those adverse childhood experiences, their health was better. So it's now accumulating some of the science. So we've got observational studies about the power of one, and we're now getting scientifically more rigorous studies. So it's very, very exciting. So relationships are the nutrient of the brain. Relationships are what neutralize the impact of stress on the brain as well.
Excellent. I'm looking, we have a couple people with their hands up, so I'm going to go to Liz first and then Paula. So Liz, go ahead.
Hi again. One of the questions from the chat box for Eugene is, it's actually a comment about getting some suggestions for parents who are, I guess, using communications with staff, with educators, and having conversations about their children in a very negative way, and really talking about misbehavior and sharing with them very negative things. So I guess it sounds like, you know, as an educator, how do you respond to that? If it's through a forum like this, or you know, over the phone, however you're communicating with your families, how can we support parents when they're really feeling, and what I take from it, and it's not in the text, is that level of stress that they're feeling, and then it's coming out as misbehavior, or they're thinking their child is misbehaving.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure that is a very, very real thing happening just now. And so I think what I come from, where I come from, the way that I think about things is the very first thing that we do is we validate those feelings and say, oh my God, it must be so hard that his behavior is like this, and that's how you feel about it. So first of all, you regulate the parent. And you do that by connecting with them, by being empathetic, by being sympathetic, and say, tell me, what are you doing to manage? So you lend your humanity. That's number one. Because what we might do is jump quickly to find it, fix it, what I call F2 behaviors. But if we don't sit with the parent, first of all, to regulate them, to be down at that brown part of the brain that Stuart talks about, then we will never get to helping them to relate to you and then to finally reason. So one, get in there and validate, ask them what has happened that, that has worked out well. Ask them what my friend calls their values, needs, and goals. But so how do you translate? Well, what's important to you? What do you need right now? How can I help you? What difference will that make? So be and sit with them in their pain, number one. Number two is then try, if you can, to say to them, you know, I wonder what's going on in little Ryan's mind that he's doing this. So you want to help them relate to the child's behavior, to see it from their perspective, if you can. And you know, you hear, well, he's just trying to drive me crazy. He knows that I've got all these things to do and la, 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 la. So you help them with their mindset to say, well, you know, I'm wondering if there might be something else going on. You know, I'm kind of wondering if all of this close time at home is a stressor on all of you. And if you need to be figuring out, I don't know, do you think that might be part of it? Do you think maybe to find ways that you can break up the day so that you've got some time that's separate, that they can do things? Because if you first regulate, then you can relate, and then you can reason, you can connect in to the cortex. We need to get our judgment Janie off of our shoulders and sit with them and be with them. If that makes sense to people. Lend them our humanity.
Now I'm wondering, Paula, did you have a question?
Hi, Sue. Hi, Dr. Jean. There is a question from someone in the chat box, and it's, do you have a sense of what would be, in terms of going back to school for May, what recommendations can be issued to parents to get them ready, and how to address stress from parents as well as from staff? How to reassure the parts involved that the school will be safe. So that idea, I know we'll be talking more about it in session 4, but maybe addressing some of these issues.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that, you know, as we were talking about it earlier, it's, you know, it's quite possible that childcare will be going back before school is, just given the essential nature that childcare is. Finally, people are frickin' recognizing. And so I think we again have to keep in mind parents' fear and children's fear. Parents' fear and children's fear. So kids are recognizing that the world is different, that we're socially distancing, that we're washing our hands more, that we're coughing into our sleeves. They're recognizing all of that. But we might be, you know, that stress contagion, that fear contagion may also be affecting them. So we need to, rather than think what the worries of the kids are about returning to school, listen, ask them. We're going to be going back to school. What do you think? What are you thinking about going back to school? So that's really important. I think the second thing is we have to pull on again that the people who are making these decisions are the ones who have got the most information, and that's what we're going to go by. But when you go back to school, you're going to be very careful about washing your hands, and you're going to keep sneezing into your elbow. But the great thing is you're going to be back to play with your friends again, and isn't that great? So you focus on the positive, of it. I think that's what's going to be really important. In terms of how do you process it as a childcare center, I think that the kids are going to need lots of one-on-one time as they come back into this new, it's going to have been familiar to many of them. And so it's a slow reintroduction. You don't open the doors and the kids all flood in. I think it needs to be done in a gradual one, with enough staff that the kids feel welcomed. They have that safe, significant, and situated as a driving force for it.
That's great.
That's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jean. Liz has a question from the floor as well.
Hi, Dan. This is an interesting question. Someone's looking for some advice, Jean, for a family that's supporting an immune compromised child that understands their health limitations with regard to COVID-19.
Right. Well, I think that's a very, very tricky situation. I think it depends on the age of the child, as well. But, you know, the key thing is, in terms of what stresses us, one of the other things that stresses us is where we have high demand and low control. And so what's really important for that child who is immunocompromised and recognize that they are in a higher risk group, that they get to control as much of their life as they can, that they are the ones who are, again, that's why I said at the beginning, it depends on how old they are, that they have control over what they can control. And so to have conversations with them completely about, yeah, you know, it's you are not going to be able to go back to school at the same time as others until there are certain conditions in place. So what can we do about that? What will make you feel okay with that decision? So again, you hear from me, my always default is to know what's in the child's mind rather than assuming, to give them as much as developmentally they can manage at the time, but to never lie, but be honest with them. Other people may have thoughts on that too.
I see once in a while that Lois, your box lights up. Lois, are you having something that you wanted to add?
No. Sorry, Sue. I have lots to add, but my mic was off. But I'm just thinking about the conversations about children going back to school, and I was writing our content for our upcoming sessions, or session 3 and session 4. Session 4 particularly, we'll be talking specifically about how people are feeling from the educator perspective, and we'll think about what might be a play for parents and for children, and how we're all going to resume our connections in programs and feel safe doing so, and continue to uphold our pedagogy. So stay tuned.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that we'll be sharing then is some of Bruce Perry's work. He has been he is a psychiatrist and a neuropsychiatrist, and he's one of my absolute heroes. I've learned so much from him over the years, and he is holding what he calls office hours, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for an hour. And there's one of them that is specifically about institutional care, looking at, and so not institution as an institution, but organizational, sorry, not institutional, organizational care, and thinking about how to address, how to be the best organization in terms of thinking about stress and thinking about what people can manage and cope with, as well as build their own resilience. So we'll be sharing that resource if people want to look at Bruce Perry and pandemic and COVID, or let's see, is it neurosequential model in COVID? We'll be posting it for sure on our when we talk about it specifically.
That sounds great. I'm really looking forward to that. I was keeping an eye on a chat on social media on Facebook between educators who are looking for some guidance, like how to be the best we can be. It was really the undercurrent of that. And so I think people are really thirsty for that. I went looking, the province announced guidelines for 65 industries today, and I went looking, and childcare isn't on there. However, Health Canada has some great guidelines, and it'll be interesting to hear Bruce Perry's perspectives and insights as well. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Great, Lois. Thank you for that. Just as a little aside, just make a note that the next video, so we have 4 videos for you, and the next one will be posted with a link on the ASCY website, which will then take you to Jean's YouTube channel, which will play then the second of the 4-part series. And we have figured out a way that you can register for the session at that time when we connect you to the next video. So that will make it smoother. And the next time it won't be on this exact platform, but it'll be on a webinar platform. So it'll look a little different next time, but it'll be fabulous nonetheless. But certainly on Monday, May the 4th, take a look at the ASCY website, and we'll connect you with Jean and her YouTube channel, and we'll go forward for the next series of talks that we're going to have about this topic. I'm just wondering, we're starting to run out of time here, if there's any other questions that people would like to bring forward. Here's your chance. I'm going to ask Liz and Paula and Lois if they see someone's hand go up or a question in the chat. But maybe what I could ask you, Dr. Jean, if I could just, when we were having our chat last time, we talked about Stuart Shanker and his wonderful work and his 5 domains of self-regulation. And you were talking about biological, emotional, cognitive, social, and pro-social self-regulation. And I know that's a big question, but it might be a nice way to end our time tonight if you want to just give a brief overview of those points.
Yeah. So it's great. And, you know, I'm really excited because I've followed Stuart's work for a long time. And I'm actually now doing the book club with Susan for the manual for schools. So that's really great. Sometimes I have so much to read that if I don't have some structure around, I don't get to it. So I love his reframe of how do we think about kids and their energy and their behaviors. And so what he talks about is that self-regulation is different than self-control, because self-control is really about inhibiting impulses, right? Self-regulation is more like, I call it being the boss of your emotions, your behaviors and stuff. But what Stuart talks about is how do you manage your energy and how do you recover from it? So if you are, if your energy is being sucked out of you because you're hungry or you're tired, or there's too much noise around, that is a stressor to your red brain. Your biological systems are trying to cope with that, which means that you don't have very much juice left to be thinking about sitting at the circle and doing what you're told, right? So he talks about us as adults being stress detectives to see, are there things in that biological domain that are stressing kids like the ones I mentioned? Are there things in the cognitive domain that are stressing kids? So the work is too hard, or the work is too easy, or they're not following the instructions, or other kids are following along. You know, you see kids with central auditory processing difficulties who don't get the instructions right away, right? So that's a cognitive stressor. Then there's an emotional stressor. You know, are they just overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the classroom or at home? Are they under-regulated? Are they just so low-key that they haven't been activated up emotionally? They're not connected. And then he talks about the pro-social and the social domain. So all of these areas can create stress for kids. They look, though, like behavioral problems. And if we think of behavior as being that tip of the iceberg, we need to be the detectives who say, okay, here, what is the real story about this behavior? And then there are 5 steps that you go through. And I never remember all of the steps. You can maybe help me here, Sue. But the big one is that you've reframed the behavior. You see it not as misbehavior, but that you see that it is a behavior that comes from stress. First of all, our mindset is so very important to that. You become a detective to say, where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? What are the provocateurs that are precipitating it? And then you're going to come up with some ideas about how to manage those stressors through deep breathing, through jumping, through all kinds of different physical, social, emotional, all of those domains. So what are the 5? What are the 5? Can you think of them offhand?
I'm thinking to recognize the stress, identify the stressors, develop your strategies, like you said, find ways to reduce your stress.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Tools for Life will talk about creating your own toolbox. And so everyone's toolbox would be a little bit different. And some kids respond well to story time or puppet play or dramatic play or sand, water, Play-Doh. Everyone's toolbox can look a little bit differently.
Yeah, and what's key is that even as young as 2 and 2.5, kids can start to identify what their emotions are, what it is that's they may not use. I need to be upregulated now, Mama. But they can use language because when you can label language, emotion as an example of one of the stressors, when you can label it, then it makes connections to your prefrontal cortex. Yeah.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Wonderful. I'm looking at the clock. At the moment, I don't see any. I know our time is coming to a close. We always enjoy spending time with you. You're our community champion. We love you. I can see in the chat, Jean, I don't know if you can, but the feedback has been very positive. They
terrific.
Could listen to you talk all night, and I'm sure they could, and we all could. So we want to thank you so much for finding time to come and talk to us. I want to invite everyone to take a look at the ASCY website. We'll go back to your YouTube channel, Jean, to watch the second in a series of 4 videos. And we'll be here again next Thursday at 7, same place, same time, to talk more. Look at the video and come up with some questions and some reflections for Dr. Jean for next week. So good night, everyone, and stay well.
Great. Good night. Thank you.